Welcome. I'm Dollie Freeman, and I'm here to share with you wholesome influences behind the rebrand and what to expect. So, you may be following me for a while, and this may be the very first time you've ever seen me live. But what I wanted you to know is for the last 10 years, I have had a space on the internet. I started my journey with Teach Good Things, which I quickly rebranded into the Charlotte Mason way, and probably about 18 months ago, I rebranded to Charlotte Mason Mastery. As I got better with sharing what it was that I wanted to equip my audience with, I got really clear on what it was that I wanted to do. And before I share all the what to expect with you, I want to take you on a little bit of journey of what led me to this rebrand one more time and why I've pivoted so many times. But the pivotal parts of my journey to this new rebrand, Wholesome Influences, and what it means to you. I hope that you will take apart what I'm trying to say, so in a way that you can see, well, how does this speak to me in a way of where I am right now, regardless if it's just being a full-time mom to your children or a parent to your child, because let's be honest, that's enough. That's a lot of work. And I love the poem, Hands That Rock the Cradle. We really have a task in front of us, a calling of parenting like nothing else before. It has a whole lot of struggles and challenges, but more importantly, has a lot of rewards. But my job here today is to share my journey as to what led me to this rebrand. So let me get started by sharing with you that back in early 2020, or no, it was later in 2020. It was late in 2020 when we were all shut down with COVID and everything was shut down. I got to this place where I got very um, passionate about the crisis I felt this world was going. And seeing things in my own United States, I was really desiring to be used in a different way. I don't know if you ever felt like, use me differently, Lord. Well, in this moment, I was away riding on a retreat and by myself in an Airbnb, and just hearing the news and hearing what was going on in the world and in my own area, where in Richmond, Virginia, where all the monuments, the historical monuments, were taken down. And it was just devastating to my heart. And I remember speaking to a man at our church. I just absolutely love Henry. And speaking with him, I shared with him my frustration, and he said to me, "Is it a kingdom issue?" And when he said that to me, I was like, "What do you mean is a kingdom issue? This is obviously not a kingdom issue. It is the United States, but these are dear to me." And he cautioned me. He goes, "I would really caution you not to get that upset unless it's a kingdom issue." Those words to this day help guide and direct my emotions, my decisions, my reactions, as well as my actions. And it helped guide me to this place at this writing retreat where I remember just sitting and thinking, you know what, God, I have this desire in my heart to have $1 million business, not $1 million lifestyle. So I'm not really sure why this desire is so strong in me that keeps me moving forward and keeps me working as a homeschooling mom, one that, has a lot to share, and has built my skills over the years. But I've never started out expecting this desire to be burning inside of me. And so I remember just being at this place of hearing, "Is it a kingdom issue?" in my ear, and just saying, "You know what, Lord? You go ahead and you make my business $1 million business, and I will do something for your kingdom." And what was in my heart at the time was the way that the educational system of the United States and across the world, but I'm not called for across the world, even though you might be watching across the world. My heart is for America. I grew up and had experience in the public school, the Christian schools, and homeschooling. Not many people can say they've experienced all three types of education. Thankfully, I can say that because I've learned a little bit about everything, but I do distinctly remember praying in school, scriptures being said. I remember pledging to the flag. I remember singing patriotic songs. I remember character being very important. I remember the teachers had authority in the classroom. I remember my parents had authority. I remember a total different world than what my children are growing up in. And because of that, I got a little passionate about it. And so I was like, Lord, you know what? I don't know what this looks like, but you bless my business to become $1 million business, and I will start or restart Christian schools across America. That was a pretty big thing that came out of my mouth, an idea that I didn't even know what it looked like at the time. I just knew I couldn't sit back and watch the Bible and prayer being taken out of our schools for decades and seeing how the culture has deteriorated and degenerated into what it is today. I got very passionate about that. I came home and I started talking to my husband about it, and I didn't know what it was like. But we started to pray about it, and I just kept getting woke up really early in the morning, and I was like, okay, so I'm not equipped to build these schools, the brick and the mortars and to fill those seats. What I'm equipped to is marketing. This is where I put $75,000 behind my education to know how to do online marketing. I'm going to use that skill and figuring out how to raise funds to start and restart Christian schools. And so I had that passion. But in the whole premise of this, I'm like, well, God hasn't made me $1 million business yet. I wasn't there. In fact, I was far from it at the time of this. And I still am. But what I want you to know is I had this big idea I didn't know how to even move forward with. And I just know that God told me to move forward. My husband was going to on board with it, and he's supporting me in the whole thing. And we were like, okay, we're going to start a nonprofit. And in that time, I started to move forward. I started to make these baby steps forward towards this calling that I had burning inside of me. Still didn't know what it looked like. I was learning little things by little things, really overwhelmed. I remember sometimes being on my front porch and just having tears coming down my face, like, God, I think this is too big for me. What did I promise you? But I wanted to be a woman of integrity, and I wanted to stand behind what I said in front of God. I wanted to tell him, use me, and I will do a purpose that you're equipping me for. So in that, I got to this place where I was making movements forward. And next thing you know, I'm going to try to get through this without tears. But next thing you know, I lost our sister almost a year to today. The end of this month, it'll be a year. And it totally took my breath away. It took our entire family's breath away. And 34 days later, we lost my daddy. We never even saw that coming. Yes, he wasn't feeling well and stuff, but none of us expected it was to death that he was dealing was not death related. So here we are losing two very important people to us, and the very two people that I shared that calling with in details. My sister was the first one, other than my husband and our children, that I talked to about this. It was too big. It was too big to put words to and say, yes, this is what I'm going to do. But one day I called her on Easter, that Easter before. And she said, "Hun, just tell me, what is it that you're doing? I would like to know." And for the very first time, I shared the name, I shared the verse behind it, the mission, and she got so excited. She goes, "I need to look this up in my Bible. I need to see that." And so she opened up the Bible, and what you don't know about my sister is my sister's had a very hard life. We've had education together. We know what it's like to go to public school, and she never went to Christian school, but she had experience with homeschooling. And she struggled with sin. She struggled with temptations, and it led her down a really hard life. But thank God, through my dad's talking with her, she accepted Christ again, and she was reading her Bible more. So on this day, this Easter day, on my front porch, I shared that with her. And just literally a few months later, she was gone. And then my dad, who inspires me from his sacrifices that he's made for our family to make sure that I had a Christian education, far surpassing what looked like was financially possible for us. he passed as well, and the 2 people that just were there encouraging and, leading me forward in this were gone, and the grief just pushed me in a place where I could not move forward. I was just grieving deeply. I moved into this place of fear over my own health because at the time I thought I had MS. Thank the Lord I do not. And I was going through a whole lot of physical therapy and some testing and stuff. And my daddy, well, let me go back up. The day my sister passed, she sent me a message and she said, "Stay strong." Those were her last words to me in text. And so they became my motto: stay strong, stay strong. And then my daddy, knowing that I was dealing with what I thought was MS, he said to me, "You do not have MS. Where's your mustard seed?" And those 2 phrases have moved me forward. But I'll have to share with you, the grief was so deep that I didn't do anything for 4 months. I just sat on my couch reading a book my daughter gave me, listening to worship songs, talking to my mommy multiple times a day, talking to my siblings, hugging my kids more. I felt like grief and fear stopped me in my tracks. And they did. They truly, truly did. I couldn't work on my business. I couldn't send emails out. I was showing up coaching. And honestly, I was just going through the motions. And we had prayer at our church in March, the very beginning of March, or maybe the end of February. I don't quite remember the dates. But I remember feeling convicted that I had to publicly confess the fear that I had in my life at that time before I asked for prayer physically. And so I stood in front of our church with probably about 50 people that came to this praise and prayer meeting. Maybe it was a little more. And I got up and I started just crying and just, sharing my grief and how I'm living in constant fear over my own health and my timing. And I remember a lady of her church walked straight up to me and she says, "Do not fear death. We have eternal life with Christ Jesus. Death is not something to fear." And I remember grabbing a hold of that and saying, I just wish that that ministered to me a little bit more than it did. And it didn't, because I still had that fear there. But in confessing is the only time we can really get rid of things like that. And so I publicly confessed that before they prayed, and they prayed for me and anointed me with oil. And then I went to my seat and I sat down, and I had a mound of dirty tissues all over the floor. And I bent down to pick them up. And in picking them up, I sat up and I saw this man who I only seen once or twice in our church, because he had just started coming to our church. And we had just prayed for him because he was fixing to go on the mission field to Africa. And I only knew in that moment his name was Carter because he told me his name. But this was our first conversation that we had. And he says, "I can see how deep your grief is. I can see how deep your fear is." And he goes, "But I want to tell you this." He opens up his Bible in Matthew and he started talking to me about after John the Baptist had died or was killed, Jesus separated himself and he grieved. And he grieved deeply. And he goes, "I've been studying this and I've been studying grief." And he goes, "I felt so compelled to come and talk to you about this, even though we don't know each other and I don't know your background. I don't know what it is that you do for work. You just said that you haven't been able to work for months." And he goes, "But I feel like I need to tell you something that's really hard on my spirit right now. And I can't leave without telling you this." So he starts talking to me and he goes, "After that, Jesus's ministry began." And he started to say that his ministry was so empowered with the Spirit of God on him that lives were transformed. Sin was broken. He started talking about all of these things and he's speaking it on me. And I accepted it. I was like, "Thank you. Yes, pray for me. I accept it." And I pondered it because before my sister passed, I was on a pretty good momentum with my business. My business was growing very, very well. And I got to this place where I just didn't know. And so I had this prophecy on me. I was like, I'm going to just pick it up and I'm going to see what happens because I believe in prophecies. I believe that a stranger who does not know me can encourage me just as much as a friend who knows my everything. And so I took those scriptures to heart and I began to pray over them. A couple weeks later, my husband and our two boys started our 14-week RV adventure. And in that time, I began to rest and my body began to heal. I began to be encouraged. Uh, Confessing fear was a wonderful thing because it started to walk me through. But more importantly, Carter's prophecy over me began to say, he's not finished with me yet. He's still working on the calling I have in my heart and this passion I have in my heart, even though I didn't have the strength mentally, physically, emotionally to pick that thing up and to keep walking with it. But what I did have was the desire to fulfill my purpose. And so I said, you know what? We're going to go to these conferences that I already paid for and already booked to be a speaker and an exhibitor at before my sister passed. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this and I'm going to show up for these families and see what God has in store. And so I went forward and we showed up at these conferences and I began to have unbelievable conversations with these parents, not just mothers, but mothers and fathers that came to my table and started to speak to my husband, myself, and my oldest boy, Matthias. They started to share things with us, and conversations lingered, some an hour, some a little more than an hour, some just 15, 20 minutes. But those conversations changed the trajectory of what it is that I'm doing. It set me on this path of a new ministry. And as I began to step into this and hear the struggles that parents are having, I began to recognize the need of flipping my business and not having these preconceived ideas of what Charlotte Mason is and what she isn't, and if they can do it or if it doesn't fit their philosophies of education, but instead recognizing people do not understand her method of education, that it's strictly based on how the brain is influenced to learn and how different aspects can either be wholesome or unwholesome. And in that, when people hear me speak of Charlotte Mason this way without using Charlotte Mason, they are pulled in and just soaking in everything that I'm saying and becoming sponges. But the moment I would say Charlotte Mason, they would their gestures change. They would block my words out, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, they don't know the fruit in which I'm speaking to them. And so when I had my second conference, it became even more transparent that I need to remove Charlotte Mason from my marketing, because in order for me to step into this new ministry, I have to meet the people where they are, and I have to stop preaching to the choir. And that's where I felt I was in that moment, that I was only able to help those who knew they wanted Charlotte Mason. It's almost like we cannot help people who already know they need Jesus as much as we can help those who know nothing about Jesus and how it works and salvation. I must come into this knowing that I have to come and meet them where they're at, not where I want them to be. And so to do that, I had to flip my business, which is why Charlotte Mason Mastery is disappearing and why I'll only be speaking from the platforms and teaching from the platforms of Wholesome Influences. So Wholesome Influences is strictly wholesome ideas and understanding how influences work and how we as parents are losing our influences on our children. If your children are not willingly obeying you, if they're balking and struggling and you're having constant battles of the will, if they're butting heads and you're having power struggles all day long, you have already lost the influence over your children. And this is what I'm being called to share on my platforms, is to help people to understand what is influence really, where is it that our children are being influenced, and more importantly, to not let our children conform to this world, not just our children, but us ourselves. There is nothing like this time in history except before the flood, where so much unwholesome things are in the eyes of our children, that we have these tools in front of us that are helping us to conform to these things of this world, when in fact we are pulling further and further away from attending church. Church attendance are so far down. Churches have closed their doors because of pandemics. I know too many who have told me we're not in our church anymore. They're not even having online services. So they've had to find new churches. Those who were attending church became very comfortable and occasionally will watch online services, which I can tell you, having experience of both live services and online services, there's nothing like a live service. There's nothing like it. And then we have where the Bible doesn't even get dusted off in some homes. And then you have prayer being the last resort instead of the first thing. We are in a place where our spirituality is at risk, and our eternity and our children's eternity is hanging in the balance. So I cannot stay quiet any longer. I know what Charlotte Mason has taught me in 22 years of reading her original writings. I know what scripture has taught me. And I don't know, I was 4 when I got saved. I was 12 when I really dedicated my life to the Lord and confessed him as my savior. And then I was 22 when I decided to dig deep into scriptures. So I'm 50 now. So it's quite many years of having God in my life differently at different levels. But what I can tell you is everything within scriptures in Charlotte Mason's original series mesh to so perfectly to keeping us where we go the right way and grow to fruitful purpose. It's there. But I don't think we have the time for some parents to be able to learn all that I've learned in these years. And it's time for me to just break it down into the nuggets that will help you transform your family fast, help you get those influences back, keep the influences, and more important, leverage influence to help arm yourself and your children against the influences of this world. So I'm about to turn my website live. But before I do, I want to tell you where I'm taking Wholesome Influences. As you can imagine, I'm going to be talking a whole lot about influences on my platforms. But in addition to that, as I've been coaching clients for over 4 years, I've recognized that the number one thing they're struggling the most with, and honestly, it's what we struggle with as parents as well, and the things that I've made mounds of mistakes with, is obedience, and how we actually form that habit of willing obedience in our children. And so we are, it's a little scary saying this out loud, but we are stepping into obedient events, because this is where it all stems down to. You and I need to become more obedient to the Holy Spirit. You and I aren't even obedient. Therefore, our children are not obedient. They don't really know what it looks like because of the allowances we've allowed our children to have, the things that we've done, the mistakes we've made in the call for obedience that has led our relationships to a place of breaking, a place of hurting. I know what I'm sharing in these obedient events are things that nearly cost my relationship with our adult daughter. They were mistakes that I had made for years, and they just kept going and kept going and kept going. And it wasn't until she had one influence in her life, one, that brought all those things to the surface and nearly cost me my daughter. And I'm not saying just my relationship, it nearly cost me my daughter. Anxiety, depression, suicidal, these things are hitting our children. They're hitting everyone in a way that scripture can solve. If we understand influences and we implement scriptures in those places, we've got this conquered, but it's going to take being a new breed of Christian parents for us to be able to arm ourselves and our children against this. So these obedient events are some are going to be online in the form of webinars. So you want to be watching for them. And I'm happy to say that with the launch of our nonprofit, and I'll share more about that coming. I'm not going to give you all the juices now because we're still working through it, but we just had our nonprofit meeting on Saturday and we voted in these live one-day obedience events across the United States. Now we have limited time, so we are going to be very selective as to where we're going this first run of them. We have limited events that we can do, but we're trying to partner with churches who will have us to come into their church, and they invite their community to come sit with us for we're still working out the details, but for a day. It's probably not going to be an 8-hour day. I'm not sure what that looks like yet. And I share with the support of my husband and my boys. Again, we're still working through what that looks like, but we're going to be sharing how to raise obedient children. And in that, we'll be opening up the Obedient Child, a new digital course that I just completed that walks you through willing obedience, bringing your children from rebellion to compliant, and then also choosing consequences. So this new way of events, we're going to get right to the nitty gritty because mom and dads, if you lose influence on your children, the world has gained it. So we'll be doing that. So you're going to be watching for that. That's going to be coming in the next phase of this launch. And I'm focusing in on not so much Charlotte Mason homeschooling, but parental education, because what she teaches is not a curriculum. It is not living books only, because it's mind to mind. And Charlotte Mason said that throughout her books. Influence is mind to mind education. We are educated by our intimacies. So it's totally up to the parent what a child learns, but you must learn how the mind actually is influenced with ideas and how it grows its knowledge. So I'll be focusing on parental education using the guides of my 22 years of experience homeschooling, along with the method of Charlotte Mason, as well as experience of graduating our children using this method. So I'm real excited to be able to do that with you all. Now, would you like a little peek in at what I'm about to open up in just a few minutes? I'm going to get into the comments really quick. Hello, Gabby. Nice to have you here. You're still in my prayers. Elizabeth, hi. I'm so glad that you're here too. Gabby says, the more I ponder God, the more my Netflix movie list keeps dwindling down to a handful of titles that are wholesome. I love how God convicts in a gentle and encouraging way. He really does. He really does. Now, as I'm about to open this up, I want you to know that, taking you back to the beginning when Carter came up and shared and confessed or prophesied over me that I was going to be stepping into a new ministry, that the Lord was going to bless this ministry in such a powerful way, just as he did Jesus's ministry. Powerful things he said over me. I almost wish someone had a recorder because I was still quite emotional. But in that, my prayer has always been on this RV trip, Lord, I need less stress in my life for my physical. I have what's called essential tremors, and stress causes me to have tremors from my head all the way to my feet. So too much stress will show up where people visually can see I'm stressed. So I needed to streamline my business, and I had this business and I had the nonprofit and I had another business, and in obedience, I closed the other business completely. That was a hard decision, but one that I know God rewarded me instantly on. God has directed me in several things over the last few months in obedience, and every time I'm obedient, He's opened something else to me. But isn't it our God that when we say, "Use me, this is what I'm going to do," that all of a sudden everything kind of falls into place and our inner desires get met too? Isn't that amazing? This is what's happened. So let me share with you Wholesome Influences. I'm so excited about this, and I'm going to just tell you it's still in construction mode. Speaking of construction mode, if you've ever watched me before, you're probably thinking, man, Dolly, your background's pretty bland. It's bland because God is doing something different in our family, and we're not really sure what it is. But we came back June 30th on our RV trip, and July 1st, we started processing our home to put it on the market. August 16th, we put it on the market. August 19th, we had a contract. And this Thursday, September 15th, we will be moving back into our RV until undetermined amount of time. We don't know. But we find it funny that the Lord is birthing in us these obedience one day events across America. So isn't it kind of funny that this is all kind of happening, and out of obedience of putting our house up for sale and getting out of debt, God is just opening up things that we'd never even thought. So it's not quite where I expected it in phase one, and this is what I'm calling phase one, because I had 3,100 square feet of home, from a full attic all the way down to our first floor of things. We also moved our daughter out, and the amount of donations, the amount of trips to the dump, and the amount of things that we're storing is much, much smaller. And so it's just those things we want into our forever home whenever that comes around. So I share that to say it's not quite what I wanted it to be just yet, but I'm so excited. And it's calling out Christian parents right away. So if you have a Christian parent that you know that needs help, if they're struggling with influencing their kids because there's constant battling of the wills and butting of the heads and this power struggles within the home, they need to hear what it is that I'm sharing. So be sure to invite them to come on by. Now, I'm going to become more intentional in my email list than you've ever seen me become in October. October, you're going to see me become unbelievably intentional about the things I put out. So you're not going to want to miss my emails. I'm going to be able to help you become equipped to influence your kids, form good character, foster loving relationships, and discipline faithful Christians. That's what our goal is. And so when you come here, it helps me to know who I'm writing to. Isn't that pretty cool? So tell me where you are right now. And this can change anytime you get on a list for something else again, but just tell me where you are right now. It helps me to kind of gauge what my email should be saying. So do me that favor and just identify where you are and then get on the list there. Now, we believe that behind every idea, there is a potential influence for good or evil that forms the nature of a person. So there are four areas that contribute to those ideas. It's influences happening mind to mind. The conscience judges as if an ideas are good or evil, consequences influences choice, and habits form with repeated action. These are the four things you're just going to think about all the time. And I put them here in really a visual way to aid you in those moments where emotions kind of take over. You can start saying, wait a second, I'm influencing my kids mind to mind. Your conscience is going to tell you if it's right or wrong. Consequences is going to influence you. And then your habits, anything you're repeating, good, bad, or ugly, or indifferent, those are going to be the things Now, a lot of people get influences wrong. I've heard this so much over the last 2 years. Consequences do not work. Well, it's probably because kids have been home because of the pandemic and mom and dads can't seem to get the kids to do things. Well, part of it is you've lost your influence. Another part is you don't understand consequences and they do work and you have to understand how. So I teach you the influences of consequences. So you're going to want to grab that as well. Now, what passioned me is the statistics show that 70% of young adults are really walking away from their faith and they're adopting the character and conduct of this world and they're lacking valuable knowledge. Now, where I got the statistic is Manoa and I, our 12-year-old, went into Creation Museum by ourselves. My husband had to work out in the vehicle on our RV trip, and our oldest, Matthias, had returned home after 8 weeks on it. And so he didn't go to the Creation Museum with us. So it was the first time I was ever there with just one child. And boy, did we have a good time. We sat in the debate with Ken Ham and Bill Nile. And in that debate, I heard Bill Nile tell a little girl who verbally said, I agree with Ken Ham. He says, you go ahead and you go ahead and believe that for now, but when you're older, come to university and we'll change your mind. When he said that, he had such a look, a devilish look on his face, like something I really can't explain, but it put a fire in me for my nonprofit in a way that I can't even begin to tell you. I came out of that place to say, we've got to figure this out. We've got to pray through this. We've got to get this going because we've got to stop people like Bill Nye thinking that he's going to rob our kids. And when I saw that statistic, I was fired up. I said, we have to do it now because that is crazy. Only 30% of children are keeping their faith. That's ridiculous. Thankfully, our children are part of those 30%, but we've got to stand up and unite together and say, not my kids, which brings me to my movement that we're starting. I'm so excited about this movement. People in my community are already getting fired up about it. And you definitely want to look this up because this is where you're going to get armed. You're going to figure out how to arm your children and you're going to get passionate every day and saying, not my kids. So find out about that movement. Then coming in October, I told you in October, I'm going to get really narrowed down on influence. You're going to see me showing up in intentional ways I've never like it is right now. And so I'm going to be starting a new podcast, Influencing Your Kids. It's going to be 100% about all the influences of the world, parental, Christian, all the influences. So you do not want to miss that. I'm going to be having guests coming on. I'm going to be having my clients coming on from time to time. So you don't want to miss this. It's a brand new format for me, and I'm so excited. All right. And lastly, you need lasting influence, not just a little bit. You need it lasting, and it requires intentional, consistent, and loving frameworks. And I've put all of that framework into one program, and it's called the Wholesome Thinkers. Now, that's not open right now, but you can learn more about it by clicking on that and getting on the wait list to learn more. So these links at the bottom are not all there. It's under construction, just like we are right now in our home. So be patient with me. It's coming, and there's a lot that is going to be coming as I move us into phase 2. I wore this shirt on with intentions, do all things with great love. This is what I have to keep telling myself. I love you. I love Christian parents who are really struggling and really having a hard time. So when I'm struggling emotionally, physically, mentally, all of the to-do list, I keep saying, no, I've got to do things with great love. And that is a sacrifice I'm willing to make right now. And God has been faithful in it. So I want you to be watching probably in the next half an hour. My site will open up so that you can go and get on these things. But do me a favor, help me start the momentum out strong. Invite the people you know. Share this on your Facebook page. Share this video so people understand. And then you're going to want to go, and I will post it really quick. make sure they have this ready. wholesomeinfluences.com. That is where you can go and find me moving forward, wholesomeinfluences.com. Now, over the next, hopefully before too much longer, Charlotte Mason Mastery will no longer be there. Neither will the Joy Filled Mom. Those sites are disappearing. We're working on getting some of the best resources moved over. That's going to take some time. So be watching for that. Gabby says South Carolina, Orange County specifically, 15 minutes from Disneyland if you need a visual. I think you're talking about my one day obedience. We have several people who are already shooting out inside the community where they would hope for us to be. And we talked about the locations a little bit at our nonprofit meeting. And we'll be having our very first one day here locally with our church. I think it's November 5th. I think so. We're going to run through it and we're going to see how it goes. But what's really exciting is that anybody who signs up for the obedient child at those events will be actually putting money into a local school, either a Christian school that's either starting or restarting, or they want to support because maybe that church doesn't have their own Christian school. So we're really excited. God has just streamlined this so well. And I cannot begin to tell you how overjoyed I am that God has used this broken, weak vessel for his glory, just because I said, here I am, use me. And my goal is that my business gets recognized sometime in the very near future for not having $1 million sales. That's no longer my goal. My goal is that my business generates $1 million for our charity. So, woo, I just said that publicly on record, but that is our goal now. And we know that by keeping that focus, we will be doing the finest quality of citizenship, which is magnanimity. And that is our heart, doing all things with great love and changing lives in the process and taking them back for Christ. So we're going to make sure education includes Bible and prayer, whether it's at home through the parental education or if it's in a Christian education. So thank you for showing up. Thank you for watching. And this was much longer than I expected, but man, there's a lot on my heart and I could not wait to share it with you all. So you be watching. I'll be opening up that site in just a few minutes. Until next time, watch for me in October and get the resources and get ready because October comes, we're going to be flying and we're going to be digging deep in influences. Until then, bye for now.